Mr. Ramadan.
I'm so grateful to be here before you at the relevant time, sir. The stars aligned for me this morning. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do apologize for Mr. Bisessa for a few moments. He'll join us in a short
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I also apologize for being alone. I just sent for one of my juniors to join me, but I left them with a task to pull some stuff together.
You look completely deserted, actually, this morning.
I'm feeling very comfortable in that status.
Are you? Right, okay, good.
It's about a volunteer being his junior.
Right. May I inquire, Mr. Peterson, if in fact it's going to be you who addresses the Commission?
At this stage, yes, sir. If what I left to be done has been put together, then yes, it will be me. If not, then I'll have Mr. Muti will do it.
All right.
But I suspect it will be me. Sir.
All right.
And I will be within the time assigned, sir.
Marvellous. All right. Well, then we'll hear from Mr. Ramadan first of all. Please.
Good morning, Chairman. Good morning, Commissioner Wilson. Morning to all. The only bright moment I've had since I became aware of this terrible tragedy came yesterday evening. On the way home, I received a call from Tia Gopal, the mother of Aliyah, and she asked for me to convey to the Commission, to Mr. Maraj, and all of my colleagues the gratitude that she feels. And for the first time that Aliyah had any moment of brightness since her father's parting was to have heard her words read so that the public would know that her father meant more than just a number, not just a name, but he was a truly loved person. And I want to personally thank the Commission for taking the robust position that what matters most in this Commission, notwithstanding the recommendations we will make that will affect the way we move forward in things, is the human value it has put on those who have gone, and more importantly now, the human value of those who are left with the burden of their loss. To have heard Vanessa Kusi, Catherine Ali, Jamie Ali, Afisha Henry, Nicole Greenidge, come with the courage that it must have taken to sit and to speak words that emanated the grief that they would have felt. It is really a translation into words of something so horrific, and it's only but a small percentage of what it will truly have felt on the inside. But to have given them that opportunity, it is like a pressure cooker, a release of some stress and burden from their shoulders and from their hearts that was permitted here under your chairmanship, sir. And that must go completely noted as to how we conduct ourselves. That a commission is more than just a documentary position. It is about humanity. And I shall say this at the very beginning, this is a commission like no other this country has ever seen. I've had the good fortune of being present at other commissions. And this one, sir, and I will start where I had intended to end, that wherever I've been in this country, and I've been a lot of places, Trinidadians and Tobagonians come forward and say thank you for what you do. But tell the Commission and the Chairman, we are grateful to have had him. To tell Mr. Maraj that all the years of your experience and expertise you brought to bear. And you, sir, you know you're my beloved senior, and I'm so honored to be in your presence in such a commission. Mr. Chairman, grief is underrated in this world. And I say this because when one looks at the law in terms of personal injuries or the compensation that one would get, the family that is, for those who have passed, it is almost embarrassing in Trinidad and Tobago in particular, where an arm or a leg will be worth less than 100,000 in a judgment. A life will be worth even less sometimes. And I ask, is this where we are? Is this who we have become? Trinidad and Tobago, Chairman, I know you've been here for a short period of time. To me and to many others, is the most beautiful place on the planet. From the very first breath I took, having been birthed here, and the very first sip of water came from the air of Trinidad and Tobago and the water of this land. Every bit of sustenance came from this beautiful spot on the earth called Trinidad and Tobago. I say these things to explain why. That what is at stake here is not just about apportioning responsibility, but really it is about dealing with the soul of this nation. I grew up in a nation where almost all of us knew the golden rule, which is to do unto others as you have them do unto you. And the biblical edict that to love thy neighbor as thyself. And that is why when I became aware of what had happened that fateful, horrific evening of the 25th of February, my good friend Philip Alexander had gone there in aid, like the OWTU, to make known to the public that a tragedy had occurred, but an even greater tragedy was on the horizon because there was little to no action. And I'm grateful to them both, the OWTU and Philip Alexander, because he sent me the clip of the interview he did with the son of Isaac Kurban, Michael Kurban. And when I heard that this young man was prevented from rescuing or endeavoring anything to save his father, I could not believe that that was true. But I had the opportunity to speak with him after, and then, of course, we've seen repeatedly from independent sources that that was, in fact, so. It rings in my ear and it pains in the heart when you, Chairman, put the question, a most relevant question, if it was your father, what would you do? When many may take objection to that, I think that was the heart and the kernel of what we are about. Because here we are, persons with authority never took responsibility. And we see that way too much in this nation and in many other parts of this world. That if you are given authority, it means something. It is not just a title. It is not just a right to earn a higher salary and to have perks. You are expected, the higher you go, the greater the responsibility, and that expects of you a different makeup of your being. If you weren't with it before, as you elevate yourself, so must you in terms of your learning, in terms of your capacity, in terms of your understanding, and in terms of your philosophy. We have seen a dismal failure in relation to that. In fact, just the opposite. What we have seen in this country, apart from the criminality where life has almost no value on the streets, is there is almost a formality, almost an encouragement to treat life as if it is less than what it was supposed and intended to be. If I may submit, the greatest value one has is one's life. And then the other greatest value that one has in his life or her life would be the relationships that one has. And this is where we are looking and focusing so that we could learn from this and redirect ourselves if we have already taken a path that we ought not to. Chairman Wilson, what do we have here? An accident occurred. This is not a perfect world. It is a real world. Accidents do happen. But there's a root cause. And we have found, through the help of many, to ascertain as best as we can, maybe not 100%, but with a certainty beyond a reasonable doubt, as to what the cause of the accident was. And having learned from that, I expect put things into place to ensure there's no recurrence. But we also have to put into place something to relegate this culture of uncaring and callousness, where human life is measured in what might be termed monetary views. Yesterday, I had a conversation with the one dearest to me, my wife, and I had to tell her, You know, colleagues tell me, and I'm seeing it more and more, that on a very clinical way, in terms of compensation and so, it is cheaper for your victim to die than to live, Mr. Maraj. And that compensation for the long-term care and well-being is so great that it is cheaper if they die and you pay if there is proper proof of the negligence. I am not for a moment suggesting that that occupied the minds of those who had the authority but did not take responsibility. What we do know is this accident occurred around 3 p.m. And in the confusion, clearly, and the uncertainty, zero was done. But I ask you to note that the common sense approach, as we've heard from Mr. Khan yesterday, and anybody, you don't need any specialized knowledge, that if you saw a splash in the chamber and that the men went missing and there is a hole called a pipe that ought to have been plugged, the natural inference would be, because if you're not seeing them in the chamber or in the immediate waters around, that they're more likely not would be in the pipe. Deathly silence as to where we were between 3 and later in the evening when Christopher came out. When Christopher came out at around 5:30, already on the whiteboard at the Paria Command Center was the likelihood of survival was minimal. There was a mindset. The guy's gone. And therefore, I want to suggest, and it's a known psychological fact and truth, there is a confirmation bias. And one of the witnesses, Mr. Mushtaq, said he knew about it, where you propose in your mind a belief and that you do everything to confirm that belief, notwithstanding there may be other bits of information to undermine the what shall I say, the structure of your belief. That was at around 4:30. I put it in general terms. But around 5:30, when Christopher came out, it changed the paradigm. Because if you did not know before, you certainly would have known then. And what did he say? To be repeated. Go back at your father. He's right behind me. His brothers were right there. Go back and save them. What did Paria do? Those who had responsibility. Absolutely nothing. That mattered most. That is the rescue. Because we admit, accident already occurred. The next stage must be, if we are to value human life, rescue. And before that even, sustenance. What is the natural consequence of men being in a pipe, possibly with little to no air? They would require the first thing as air. We've heard that a hose or somebody, a simple man told me, he said, listen man, join up as many PVC pipes as you could and push it in and pump air in. They will hear bubbles if it doesn't reach them and they will come towards it. Simple. All of the technology, all of the expertise, all of the high-level ranking jobs didn't consider any of that, but we had an incident command team with a commander. What a fantastic resounding name. Commander. One would think immediately to straighten one's spine and resolve that you should salute such a person. But I say, no, I do not salute such a person. Because we heard the evidence of those who peopled the incident command team. You heard Catherine Balkisoon, who, on a simple, straightforward question, if it were your father, what would you do? Burst into tears. And my friends, of course, in Trinidad we have a term, rose, like if you hit a Jepnes. Everyone in condemnation for the most germane, relevant question. Because that is what would occupy you. You are on site. This is not an artificial thing you're looking at TV on. Human beings are around you. The man's son is complaining, I want to go, I need to go, I could do this. By which time, of course, and I know all the details will be more than adequately considered by the cumulative efforts of my colleagues and certainly Mr. Maraj's team. No permission. Not just no permission, Coast Guard is called in and an order was made that no one is to go in the pipe. It is resounding in my heart and ringing in my ear, and I shan't say where it came from, but it came in this room, that you would have had to shoot me to stop me. I too hold that view. But it is not you, Chairman, it is not I. We are from a profession that we are trained to be independent, to be strong in the face of adversity, that when you are told no, you must ask why, and show me why it is I cannot do these things. But young Michael is a trained diver, and I'm sure Commissioner Wilson will attest that the profession of diving requires serious discipline. And he had been trained by his father to be disciplined, take instructions, and the mindset that you need work permits and you must take instructions from those who have the authority, and out of fear. And he was honest enough to say that the Coast Guard did not point guns directly at him. And we would hear from the Coast Guard themselves, none of them will admit that they were enforcing that instruction to not endeavor a rescue. Of course, because we are looking at this in a rearview mirror, and they cannot justify their actions that night. Cannot, because 4 men died. So therefore, in trying to justify, we come to the position of excuses or can't remember or not knowing. And I wouldn't insult the intelligence of all of us to go through the details of the Coast Guard evidence, where one goes to pick up another, the other senior man doesn't ask a single question en route as to what he's going into. No effort. They quickly said, and rightly so, if it is that they didn't have the capacity to endeavor a dive into the pipe, not trained, not equipped, to say we can't do it. But why do we take the official word of the Coast Guard as if that was God's given word, that it couldn't be done when there were those who would have come, and I shall get to that in a moment. But they stand around and they wait. And there was a nebulous uncertainty as to what their purpose was. The Coast Guard wants to tell us that they were there just to offer assistance for diving. But what did Mushtaq say? The general manager. They were there to protect Paria and heritage personnel. How does one do that? By exercising, of course, superior force, armed. What is the message sent? It is a notorious fact in this country, and Chairman, you may not know, but early last year, the Coast Guard opened fire on a pirogue, loaded with human beings, and killed an 18-month-old baby. Not just that, there was a ship from Grenada, where it was all over the news. I have some intimate knowledge in that matter, where the Coast Guard is alleged to have so beaten crew members that a young crew member from that boat had to be hospitalized, passing blood when he should be passing urine. I just give these examples. We've had other situations where the character and notoriety of the Coast Guard, I'm not condemning all of them. We are grateful for the efforts of the good, but we must certainly recognize the actions of the bad. Where one was actually charged for murder, shooting a young boy again, many years ago. I stood in protest on that, where he died from a Coast Guard bullet. So, and people in the know, in the waters, know that out there, one doesn't only expect pirates, but you expect other things. So there we are. The enforcers, I put it in this commission, they were like laying back, bouncers, just being there and ready. But Catherine, the eyes and ears of the incident command team, says that basically that they were speaking, in hostility and so. One could imagine, and you saw the attitude, you saw the personality. Don't talk to me, you can't talk to me like that. In fact, to the extent that she, to convey, and when I said garbage in, garbage out, it was not intended as an insult, but those whose gardens are prepared to receive the truth will understand that it will bear fruit. So when I said garbage in, garbage out, Mr. Piper full well knew that he was, and I'm being generous to him, that he wasn't given the sort of information that was required to make proper decisions. I give him that as a benefit. But then you have Mushtaq, who with such arrogance characterized efforts, and those who were making efforts instead of paper but in reality, willing to put literally their lives on a line, as mutterings and disregarded. We have put procedure and paper before reality and people. And there we have the character of those who have authority. And there is much more. It has been all over. Mr. Way, when being cross-examined, asked a simple question. 4 men having died, you being a member of the accident management team. How do you rate your actions? Took a sip of his water, laid back and reflected, and a very determined way indicated, excellent. Picture this. Incident command team. 4 men having died under your watch, under your authority, under your responsibility. And a year after, almost 10 months after, have the gall to sit in the face of this nation and this commission and indicate that your actions were excellent. I give him a moment of lapse, that maybe he felt he had to answer. But what is the background to this? He is still on the job. Not just he. Catherine is still on this job. Piper, Mr. Piper, is still on the job as incident commander, and these are still members of the team. The gall to have heard that they have people doing dangerous work on a daily basis. In fact, that morning that Mr. Mushtaq told us about, he had people dealing with high tension, electricity, and so. One shudders to imagine what would happen if an accident was to recur, because the characters have not changed and they think that what they have done is excellent. I put the name forward here in cross-examination that he knew. Young man, Shaquille Douglas, 29 years old, fell ill while working at Paria. Paria's ambulance came on the scene. And I don't want to speculate, but I was told this, that they had no authority to take him to a public institution, but they had to take, if at all, to a private one, and therefore there were financial consequences, and therefore they called in the fire ambulance, who came some time after, did what they could have, and then of course waited 4 hours after his fall to have him pronounced dead by a DMO. That is a culture and the excellence for which we have to condemn and to fix. But it extends beyond Paria. Some matter I would personally involved in, not professionally. My former secretary had to call me in horror that her brother had died. He had gone to work at TCL, and an accident occurred around 3 a.m. She arrived on the scene at 6. This young man in his 30s with several children, his arm had gone into one of those crushers and he passed. But whilst there, hearing mutterings from foremen and so, that when they got there he was groaning and so, no effort was made to save him, because of course what we have now is a certification issue. Reports have to be taken and be made. So the priority is not to save lives anymore, but to ensure you dot all the I's and cross the T's in those moments of anguish. And one can only imagine the pain one would feel waiting and expecting somebody to come and help you, but you bleed out. Sir, and I shall come to my recommendations, but put an asterisk on that. I had to sit, in fact, no, I was cross-examining Mr. Piper. When he sought to have a level of compassion, and of course I have compassion for everyone. But he says, it wasn't easy for me on that evening. I understand it couldn't have been. Put yourself in my position, he says. And I said, of course. You're the boss. You have the power. You have the authority. And I put myself in his position. And if it's not up to me, but every human being who loves this country will know that you cannot love the land, the water, the air without loving its people. And if you love people just for a moment, then what would you instinctively, and I'm coming to that, this thing about instinctive and emotional as if it's a negative thing. He says, put yourself in his position. Did he for a moment put himself in the position of those who were in the pipe? Understand what had happened. They went in there, so battered and bruised, I imagine, but still vital, because when I heard the audio like we all did, I heard it on the radio, the power in the voices, they were very much alive. Not broken and diminished, not near to doors, the death's door, but vital and alive. And young Christopher, thank God for him, promised them, I will return, or at least I shall send help. There was great hope and expectations in their heart, and they waited. And they waited. Minutes, seconds turned into minutes, minutes turned into hours. I do not know the exact moment of their passing, each and every one of them individually or collectively. What we do know is that zero effort was made by those who had the authority and responsibility to rescue. So we need to consider, is that the sort of personality we wish literally to be in the chair of authority? That you put yourself in your position and you don't think about the others? Every single day, men and women arise in this nation and head to their jobs. Their mothers, their fathers, their sisters, their brothers, their wives, their children expect to see them return home. There's an inbuilt expectation that wherever you go to work, there's an environment that I produce the labor, you produce the salary, but there is much more. There's an expectation that if anything should go wrong, that somebody's looking out for me. We have laws for that if you didn't want to do it personally, to ensure a safe working environment, to ensure that my life is valued to the point that you must take action. And that was betrayed. So as I stand here today, this is not just about Paria. This is not about Paria's workers alone, whether they be contracted through Kenson or directly or some subcontractor. This is about every single Trinidadian and Tobagonian who works, whether in low office or high, whether in the streets or in skyscrapers, whether we still sit in ivory towers and make decisions. Even they are expected and are entitled to some level of comfort that they will be protected in the environment and the work that they do. Betrayed completely. But yet, we continue. These persons use the law, they use the rules and regulations that were designed to protect human life as a shackle, as a stranglehold, to suffocate the very efforts that those laws were prepared and intended to effect. Instead of using the rules and regulations and laws as a tool, in this case, it became a weapon. Because all you hear is the procedures that they've created for a risk assessment first, and then a plan. But not from mutterings, not from the word of mouth that is required in moments of anguish and anxiety, and certainly of urgency. We talk about, even at the quickest to do these things may take half hour. That's in the best of times. But men are on our boat, they're on our barge, and those who are willing and able, capable, competent, and equipped are there. But we consider what they suggest as mutterings. Mr. Khan, I don't know if anybody could undermine what he has said. That at the moment when Christopher came out, it meant that the entire environment had stabilized. And that was the best time, or shortly thereafter, certainly, for any rescue to be done. And that was when all of the things, the stars aligned in terms of human capacity, equipment, will, courage to go and do the thing that could have saved these lives, but they were not permitted, absolutely, positively stopped. So, Mr. Chairman, there we are. This is the context in which I rose today to speak. That by what we do and the decisions we make, the recommendations that will emanate, must attend to these things. It must mean that the people's resources haven't been adequately provided with help from the urgings of the commissioners to get it done was, as I said, like a commission like no other. There must be direct, immediate consequences to this. Let me just say, I am grateful to the Minister of Energy, who I am fortunate and privileged to consider as a friend. Because on the Monday night, he and I had many conversations. At that time, of course, we knew that the rescue was out of the question. But he had given instructions so that family members be permitted to go into Paria so that when bodies were retrieved, that families could at least have some level of closure in that moment. Notwithstanding that, something, somewhere, some authority within did not allow that to have occurred. I also want to thank the Prime Minister and the Cabinet for having the, what shall I say, the willingness to allow a commission. I know many did not expect the commission to go the way it has in terms of the courage, the forthrightness, the clarity of purpose, and certainly the personalities that populate it. So I thank them. And Mr. Chairman, there is so much more I can say, but I will be as conservative with the time as I possibly can. I want to make some recommendations to this commission. And as I enter into the recommendations, I want to make an observation. You might recall with stark clarity the evidence from both Mr. Piper and Mushtaq Mohammed, the general manager, that whatever happens on Paria's compound or on its property is the responsibility of Paria. But you know the other side of this? It was because they were of the view that this accident occurred on their property. They took the godlike authority to prevent a rescue. I do not know where that came from, whether it's private property or public property, but they took that decision, and because of their local stand-by in society, Paria's management, a state-owned agency, the resources of the state were used under their authority to prevent the rescue through the Coast Guard. We heard that they called in the fire, but they didn't call in the police. Very interesting. Because I asked and I proposed this question, Mr. Maraj. If such an accident, not certainly one going into the pipe, but a terrible accident where lives were at stake on a private property, meaning was one's home as a clearest example, could the owner of that home say no to a rescue? I pause. There's serious gravity in that question. If at your home there's a horrible accident, or even a contractor having come, for instance, to put up windows, and the contractor falls, the window falls, and he's cut and bleeding out. His assistant, who was supposed to be there, is also cut and bleeding out on the ground. But your place is so fenced and well protected that you say, nobody coming into my property, no rescue. What would that amount to? And I say this for a reason. Because I'm going to make a recommendation that is not in my inner nature. I've never prosecuted in my entire life. I took a decision to not do that. But I have had to search deep within my conscience. I had to speak to so many, and yesterday morning I made a decision. And I confirmed it last night in further deliberation. Yesterday I met two young, beautiful lawyers, and I asked them, should I recommend, because they had been following this matter, should I recommend criminal prosecution? The answer without a blink was yes. I should. And then I thought, why do I take the position to not ever prosecute? And certainly in this case, why I resisted recommendations for criminal prosecution. And Mr. Peterson knows well, because he prosecutes a lot, that there are times when a statement has to be made that you are not just to hide behind corporate veil and corporate responsibility, that you are not personally accountable, except maybe you get a commission and you have to answer questions here, or in a court of law and you answer whatever the result with is in a civil courtroom. You are not affected. Your salary continues, but your entity pays, or the state pays. So I am moved against my inner instinct, sir, that there should be criminal prosecution recommended in this matter. You see, when persons take the view, like Mr. Holder, that we are to interpret rules and regulations to get 100% safety, and you were so generous to have allowed him to reflect upon it and dig it out of him that it couldn't be right, that he changed it. But that was the mentality and remains the mentality in the face of the enormity of 4 deaths. I'm waiting for 100% safety before I will send anybody else. Nobody asked you to send, you know. People were willing to go on their own accord, and we know full well there are devices to protect you if you're concerned about liability. And I put directly to Mr. Piper, were you interested in lives or liability? And it's obvious it was about liability. Because whose lives was he concerned about? You talk about rescuers could die, and all he coulda, shoulda, woulda. What we do know is that because of the time and the running down of that of that clock, that every minute passed, the likelihood of death increased. And they allowed the seconds, the minutes, the hours to have passed, knowing full well, by their own account, that within 4 to 6 hours, men most likely will die. And they did nothing. We wait for a camera so that we could get a view, so that we could assess, risk assess, and do up the plans, knowing full well that that camera would arrive long after the men are dead, or most likely would be dead. How do I characterize that decision? How do I tell the families? And they've heard it, they've seen it, this nation, that you will know the countdown is on, and you dither. You squander away their lives in the moments, waiting for more and better information. You know, young Buddha here, without, I'm sure, thinking it through, asked me when the matter was in progress, and forgive me, I'm going to disclose this. If Mr. Peterson is in a burning house, would you go and save him? I say, of course, without a thought. I love Mr. Peterson. I am not leaving your name out yet because it is real. Let us be in the real world. I will go in. I told her without, isn't it true? Without a moment reflection, I will go. She said, but what if? Tents burn. Yes. Yeah. She said, but what if you could get killed, or you'll be scarred for life? I paused. Because instinctively and emotionally, he's my brother. I will do it. But I paused. I said, well, I will take, and in response to the question, I will take precautions. I would look and see what I could do so I could better ensure my own safety, to ensure that I could get my brother out of the burning building. I may not be the most intelligent, but I'm not stupid. And we assume that those divers who turned up are not stupid. These are trained professionals, and therefore will not risk their lives in a whim or in a fancy, but will take calculated risk, and as they proceed, assess the dangers. And when I spoke about whether they would see an alligator, right, I did that for the very reason to show the inanity of the proposition that there were unknown dangers. We knew what was in that pipe. If there was a barrier, the tank, You could be pushed aside. Right? It may not have been easy, nobody suggests that. And that in a moment of the gravest danger, if I should go into that building and I realize, wait a minute, I cannot rescue my friend, I shall retreat. But I will do all I could to save his life. Even at the peril of my own death, of course, and if it becomes so that I cannot help him, I will not be able to, and I won't. But if it should be that I shall be scarred for life, I shall wear that as a badge of honor in the effort if I shall save my friend's life. And that is the way I grew up. This is the way I know my beloved country to be, not the other way around. So, having said that, that is why I was moved to make a recommendation for criminal prosecution. And the authorities will, of course, determine whether they should or should not. That's a matter entirely for them. But in good conscience, I must. So that a message will be sent that you cannot repose confidence in.
Can I ask you
Certainly.
This? In your making this recommendation, is it a criminal offence to fail to rescue someone?
Yes, it is. When you have a responsibility, you have the capacity to do so.
Is it?
Well, we should endeavor. There is an opening of the law on this area, and in fact, I'm happy you raised that issue because it's being tested in Florida, where Mr. Peter, no relative, of course, to my friend. Okay.
You know my family?
No, you're right, and having regard to your statement, you may very well be related. Scott Peterson, a police officer who actually was on duty at that horrific, I think it was Valentine's Day in 2018, at the Parkland shooting right off Fort Lauderdale, where students were under his responsibility to protect. And instead of going towards where the gunfire came, he retreated or did not do. So there is, I'm not up to date on it, I tried finding out more, but I know that there was an effort to prosecute there. So I'm saying that the law is expanding in that way. And if it needs amendment to put it there, so too would be a recommendation if it is uncertain. Because I know everybody is afraid of our DPP, and rightly so, because he's junior to Mr. Maraj, and a very robust Director of Public Prosecutions, and he will not wither away from his responsibility, nor shall he take public condemnation if he does not. It is for him to look at the facts, all of them, and determine whether a prosecution shall endure. So it is not in my hand or in the Commission's hand, but it's a recommendation I am propelled because of the numbers of persons who have expressed the need for us to set an example, to set a new standard in this society. If we do not, then it is likely to recur.
Might it be considered grossly negligent on the part of somebody risking sending a diver into the pipe,
yes,
and therefore make himself liable to prosecution for manslaughter or some other offence, where he has taken an unreasonable risk with the rescuer?
Yeah, well, and you said it, the words, and I listened to your words, sir. Not only are you highly favored in this nation, but you're deeply respected. And it comes from me, the level of respect I have for you, so I will not attempt to tell you here. But you said send. That is the operative word. We are not instructing anybody to go and do. Persons who are volunteering, they do it on their own ground, and they stand the consequences of their actions. But they were prevented. And if you were concerned about liability, civil or otherwise, of course, I'm not suggesting for a moment you could write away criminal liability, but I'm saying none shall attend this where this person is not sent but voluntarily go.
Is there a realistic difference between send and permit?
Very much so. Because that person is exercising an independent thought. And therefore, your actions. I am saying, look, for instance, we go back to the issue of the home where the accident has occurred, and persons are willing to go through the broken glass and rescue them because they're bleeding out. How could I be held accountable if I told that person, listen, it's very dangerous, please don't go, and they do it against my instruction? So it is not, what shall I say, robust clearly defined circumstance, but that's the job of the Director of Public Prosecutions, to look, balance, weigh all of the nuances and make a determination. But the very least is that it must be considered. That is all. And if in his robust examination finds that there is a case made out, but not every prosecution leads to conviction, we know this. But if you don't prosecute, well, that's another issue. There's always, of course, a civil court, and we, I could tell you up front, have already issued pre-action protocols to Paria and others. And of course, Paria has taken a hands-off approach. They have no liability here, notwithstanding. But we are on the issue of the criminal liability. Is there a distinction between send and allowing? Of course there is. Or not standing in the way of. And when Mr. Mushtaq Mohammed speaks about ethics, it caused a knot in my stomach to use the word ethics. When he proposes, because he's a landlord, he had a superior right to determine life, couldn't be further from the truth. And of course, there are legal devices if he was concerned. We've explored that with him. What was it? Legal devices. Yeah. So, disclaimers and so. And they were used. They had lawyers on hand that very night to advise. But that is just one. And I tell you, my Lord, Mr. Chairman, this is not something I'm comfortable, this recommendation making, but I feel compelled under my duty to this commission and to the people of Trinidad and Tobago to make. May I move to another recommendation? Headless chickens, not knowing who, where, what to do, and doing nothing as a result. I would suggest, whatever name you wish to call it, and I should just, for the sake of convenience and a hook to hang it on, Emergency Command Center, a National Emergency Command Center. This National Emergency Command Center should be peopled by personalities of an almost military disposition, who are accustomed with the most awful of environments, where lives are either sent into battle, I've just given that example, where lives could be lost and determination is made by those with authority to say go, so that there will be no flinching, no fear, and there should be courage attendant to all those who populate that august body. That hard decisions could be made in a very limited period of time. And not just that. This command center should have access to the resources of all the resources of the state and internationally, so that information, which is a lifeline of a future, is available in a moment, and not to wait months after to hear Mr. Khan say, that place stable. Go, if he had the authority. If he was in a position within Paria to see that place is stabilized, go. Those men would more likely than not be alive today. So this emergency command center will have access to all of these things, locally and internationally. A register of experts, so you have a certain type of incident, they know who you're going to call. Response time. And before that even, a plan, not just OSHA neutered, but a plan for all these emergencies, and it's shameful to have heard in an environment of refinery and pumping and so, that men at the height didn't understand at what stage that evening or before or after about delta P. The whole point and point of pair is about delta P, pumping, differential pressure. So it was a stunning example of ineptitude in those in management. Of course, I know I may be condemned by my statements that some of them they knew, but they didn't know the exact circumstances. So be it. But they didn't understand it to the sufficiency that once it's over, the likelihood of it recurring is there. But the great likelihood of it recurring will be minimized for a certain period of time. And you have to act. And it's not speculative, alone. We'd make educated guests, and I put it as loosely as that, every single day in our lives to do the necessary things. And let me at this juncture just return to the two terms that has been given a pejorative interpretation: instinctive and emotional. I spoke about my friend, Mr. Peterson, and before I miss the point, what happened in this commission, it being live and so well followed by our brothers and sisters throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago and internationally, to know, this is an example, that you could be opponents, but you do not have to be enemies. A noble profession to which you belong, sir. And we heard, of course, someone who professed to have been part of it and who certainly was not. We have too many pretenders. But the true nobility of our profession, among other things, is this: that we could fight like in Trinidad, we say cat and dog. But at the end of it, we remain colleagues, and in our case, friends. That is a wider societal message, because we see so many lives taken for the most trivial of reasons. So you can be opponents, you may have different points of view, you can fight hard for a cause or for a belief, but you do not have to become enemies and seek vengeance on anyone. So I was on the point of the Emergency Command Center where the authority is vested with all these things. OSHA. I think we need to have a retraining for all those who call themselves health and safety experts. I don't know all the terms that they call themselves, to appreciate that this is a guideline and a mere basic foundation within which you operate to ensure a safe working environment. But not as a result of that to believe that where there's an accident that has occurred, like in this case, that you are regimented to a point where you need and seek perfection before you act. Cannot be. Because as I make the point, sometimes you have to act instinctively. You have to act with some level of emotion, because if you remove emotion from anything, then what is the value of you doing anything? If you don't care, you don't care. I don't give a damn. You die, you bleed out. I leave you there. It has no effect on me. The emotion we speak to is not one of a sobbing, faltering, crumpled individual, but an emotion is really about care. And if you're too emotional that it affects your ability to be rational, to be scientific, to be logical, that you cannot then assess that there's too grave a danger, of course, there are degrees in everything. Overly emotional. That's what we're talking about. But don't say these two words as if they're negatives. Instinctive. A mother see a child about to fall off a counter. I know they will jump and fall and hurt their knees. One of my colleagues, his wife, fell to her knees on a rough and damaged her knees permanently to save her child. That is the instinct. But had she not done that, what would have been the child's circumstance? So let us recalibrate ourselves to the meaning of these words. And I remember, and if you permit me this, an example, 13th of November, Black Friday, 1981, I was in Barbados. I was on the way home in Grisettes, Mr. Peterson, around 3 o'clock. I'm alone on this very developed area. And a guy rushes past me. And about 30 feet thereafter, another guy, but he has a knife in his hand. I had never seen violence in my life. I was a mere, I think 18, whatever it was, having come from a very protective home. And I was on the streets alone, and this guy is running, and the guy behind him with a knife, and the guy with the knife comes upon him, throws the other guy on the ground, sits on his chest, and starts to stab him. The guy on the ground holds on to the hand with the knife, and then the guy takes up a stone, and he's attempting to hit him on the head with it, and I'm alone. I walk in without a thought. I held on to both hands from behind, and I just said, "Stop it!" I shook him, and the knife fell, the stone fell. He got up. He walked away. The guy who got stabbed on the face, he was all cut up. He got up and walked away. I dare not tell my parents. It took 25 years before I uttered the word to any member of my family. I'm not saying that for any other reason than to demonstrate that in a moment of emergency and urgency, you will do what you instinctively must do to save life. Of course I put my life on the line. I could have been the victim, but in that moment, I was not. I have a memory and I have a story to tell. So we mustn't diminish humanity, because that is what operates, that is what gives us who we are, and what we shall become. And the moment we remove that, we become robots. Robotic, and we talk about artificial intelligence, all we have is the artificiality without intelligence here. Because the law has now been neutered, made artificial, and therefore dehumanized. So, I speak to the retraining, recalibration of OSHA to explain those who have the authority and responsibility to apply it with the objective that it was intended for, which is to ensure a safe working environment, but not to be used, as I repeat, as a weapon and not as a tool when things go wrong to prevent rescue. You may not know, Mr. Chairman, but my beloved senior, Mr. Maraj, and please don't be embarrassed when I say these things, has been the greatest Attorney General this country has ever seen. He brought into our law, Faris is my friend, but he's still junior, and nowhere near in terms of the time given to achieve what Mr. Maraj has achieved, in practice and then as Attorney General. I wouldn't bother much to speak about, thank God for him, that we have judicial review as our law in this country. Before there was none. Freedom of information, Mr. Maraj, his stewardship. And there's so many other things. But you know what also he has under, well, that he should stand proudly upon? As they introduced the criminal injuries compensation law, so that victims or their families who shall suffer the fate of criminality could have a place to go for succor and support while the wheels slowly turn in terms of justice in the courts, so that their day-to-day lives could continue. I wanted to make a recommendation that our state, through this government, put in train to our present Attorney General, and I'm sure Mr. Peterson will take it back if they are not listening today. And if they, because I want this to happen even before possibly our report comes to the public domain, to begin the foundations of such a fund, not just for criminal injuries, but for workplace injuries. And I know I would be met with levels of criticism that we already have workmen's compensation. Without saying more, I could tell you we have written for that in relation to the families for whom we represent. And with disdain, I will tell you, there's been yet no response as to that. I had the pain, and I'm sure many others would have seen, that Ms. Kusi, who came here with such courage and was able to articulate her pain, had to throw a barbecue before Christmas for funds to sustain her family. I just put that there. I want to also recommend, coming off the OSHA retraining, that those who are given the authority and the responsibility must be of the mettle that is required to show courage, to show strength. And therefore, if they should suppose themselves to present themselves to hold that all-empowered position of incident management team and commander, that they must be adequately fortified to do so. Not on a question to start shedding tears, crocodile as they may be in the eyes of some, but be hardy and strong. I apologize. I withdraw.
Not at all.
Oh.
I just, are you suggesting that members of OSHA, the investigative arm of OSHA, should be on an IMT?
I am saying that there must be that, they must form part of the emergency.
They weren't in this case.
No, and this is the point.
Are you suggesting that they should be?
Yes.
Right.
Thank you. So if there's a need for interpretation and for guidance, don't be afraid of the law. The law is supposed to be a protector, must be a shield, and not a weapon only, a weapon for those who wish to deliberately break it, of course. but as a shield for those who seek the protection of the law. And that is why the Emergency Command Center, whatever name we want to call it, must include all of these agencies and the expertise that reside within, and not ex post facto, as we say, right? What is the term? I think it was, Mr. Peterson help me, a blood, but I call it tombstone regulations, tombstone learning. But somebody used a very graphic term the other day. Safety written in blood. Should we not have safety written on paper and in the hearts and scribed there? Not in blood, not after the fact, not ex post facto, but preventative. So all of these resources should be available through that. And I'm making the point that in that effort, not just those who will populate the Emergency Command Center must have some psychiatric, psychological testing to show that they are the metal, because at the end of the day, it's not your physicality that makes you human. It is your inner being, your emotions, your strength, your courage in the face of fear. And we do this all the while. I mean, there are fearsome people that we have to deal with. But we deal with them, and adequately so, sometimes. And we must not shun away because of our own personal fear. And I made a statement early in this commission that when I stand, I'm not Prakash Ramada. I represent those who I represent, the families. And therefore, I have to reflect their hurt, their feelings, their expectations. And I may make enemies in that process. I don't want to be enemies. I may be an opponent, but I don't want to be an enemy. But I know people take the view that if I disagree with you and you disagree with me, I shall, have vengeance waiting for you. So,
Mr. Ramadar, I don't think you can ever be accused of being anything other than Mr. Ramadar.
I will have to interpret that. But you're very generous, sir. Very, very generous. And I think we all have to be who we are. But when we take positions, I would never propose myself, which was my first passion actually, to be a neurosurgeon. But I did not have, what shall I say, the dexterity I knew that I would have required, and therefore I went to an even more noble profession, the law. And I will always hope that I can succeed there. The point being, I will not propose myself to a position I know I could never fulfill. And if you believe that you're in the face of enormity of consequences of an action or an inaction as a result of your fear, then I shan't put myself there. And that those who put themselves hard should be tested to see whether they have the capacity so to do. I keep going back to Mr. Maraj. The battles he has fought over the years, he may have been bruised, but he's never been beaten. And you know why? He has that inner strength to go forward in the face of all the adversity. When the world would be against him, he knew he was right and he went forward on that. Mr. Peterson, a man who I deeply admire and respect, he too has that. But we in our profession, none of us will say that we were going to try to operate a nuclear reactor or be a surgeon. You must be fit for purpose and not just purpose yourself because you're in the system and you know somebody and right, they get extra. I do not know if they get extra pay for these things. I don't want to cheapen the entire episode on that basis. But don't call yourself incident command and you command nothing. Don't consider yourself a member of a team when your team is only shoo-shoo in your ivory tower, men are dying down there, send your eyes and ears who really disregard the reality and therefore you're not properly informed. As my friend Gerard Small, I quoted him before when he says you could delegate but you can't abdicate, and I shall quote him today. He told me many years ago that you could fake your care, but you cannot fake being there. Of course, they will say that I was part of the procedure to stay away so they'll have a more clinical overview. But if your eyes are blind and your ears are deaf, or it gives you, what shall I say, distorted view of what is happening there, how could you make good decision? Garbage in, garbage out. Or no garbage at all. Nothing. Because they knew full well, all they needed to have known when Christopher came out, men are alive. Once you hear that, the game changes. Wiped off your whiteboard, but they kept on this thing, the likelihood of success. He was an inconvenient truth. It was easier then to suggest that they were all dead, and let's move and flush it out, and Paria continues its work. But that is why where I began, I return. What are the concepts? And I'm not surprised, and I'm sure Mr. Peterson did not on his own volition suggest that the families not be given a voice. I know him for too long. Lovely man with his family. He got instructions, and they knew full well to hear the truth, the consequences of one's action, which is a part of our lives, that if there are no consequences to your actions, you learn nothing. To have heard it, the pain, each and every one of them, and that is multiplied many times. There are so many other relatives who cannot speak, who will not speak, but who are pained to the end of their lives. Because this is not an accident like where everyone died in the moment. This is an accident where there was a clear and present ability to save lives, and no one did it. One can only imagine the psychological trauma. And I have permission to speak about Michael and his brother Nicholas. They were there. They're divers. We could do this thing. Conan, thank God we have men like Conan who came, unconnected. A brother in danger, he came. He said, I'm ready to go. We have the equipment. I have the ability. I have the will. Mutterings. No? Come with your paper. Mutterings. This is what it was described as. Therefore disregarded. Wow. So, psychological testing. And probably, I don't know if it could be trained into, but certainly we must make that effort. Where I began, I shall end. Basic common human decency would require, in a moment where an accident occurs or shortly thereafter, and this is not a place without resources. They had departments, public relations and communications. These people came, that is the wives and the children and the families of these men, not knowing if, first of all, it is true that there was an accident. Can you imagine the anguish? Huh? Afisha and her mom had to leave Grandy and come down in all that traffic, wondering, is this thing true? I hope it's not true. When I get there, let me hope that they lie. They came and they got there. They still don't know whether it's true or it's a lie. Mrs. Kurban came, her daughter Brittany in Canada, and I shan't speak about her, where she's at university, the apple of her father's eye. All the money they earn, I shouldn't say all, but much of it, resources to pay her fees on. You can only imagine, I don't want to say it, how much it is. That breadwinner taken from them. But we're on the point where they converge. Mrs. Cushy and all the other family members, and forgive me if I don't call all of your names. Nobody there to greet you. Say, listen, we've had an incident. We're very sorry about it. But as far as we know, this is what we know. We do not know these things. We are making efforts to find out. Keep them in part and parcel. Who is more invested than they? Paria? Your father? Your son? Your husband? Who could be more invested than they? And you keep them outside like old dog. Outside, sorry, I should not have said that. But outside the gates. For information, speaking to security who I'm sure would have tried their best, but they too don't know. Ambulance in, ambulance out. Nobody telling them anything. We've been through this, but it's important for me to highlight it again. And that is why, if I had to be pushed at all into criminal prosecution, it is not because of that, but it tells you a mindset that needs to be shattered. Needs to be shattered and repaired so that Trinidad and Tobago will restore itself to a country that we are known for love and care. Anyhow, they're waiting out there. Day turns into night, night turns into morning, and no word. And then an insultive meeting with Mr. Mohammed. I'm not on his case. I don't know the man, but I know what he said. and how he acted. And one of the witnesses told us that during that meeting with him at the golf course, somewhere at the golf course, the people don't want to go golf course, they want to go on the scene, go near the water, be as close to their loved one as possible, but they want meeting, and I will not criticize that much for them. Maybe they had reason to go up in the golf course. And they have the meeting there, but Mushtaq in that meeting laughs. Now, for a moment, I want to say, it might be a nervous laughter. It happens. You don't know how to respond. I'll give you that. But you're the general manager, and you must know that your body language, what you say, do, and your body language is critically important. Be read, because these people are hungry, thirsting for any bit of information and insight as to what is happening, what is your intent, what you intend to do. So I give him the benefit that it might have been nervous laughter. But if it was nervous laughter, what did you do? Don't, just assume that it's funny. I don't want to believe so. But are you helpless? What did you do? Nothing. Waited more and more, by which time, of course, cameras would have gone in, couldn't go much further, right? Time ticking, according to them, they had 6 hours after the accident, even make it to 12. What did you do? To the end of it, there was zero effort for rescue. I know as I take my seat, there are many things I would regret not having said. But I'm so confident that my colleagues, all of us, contributing to the Commission's fantastic team, and the Commissioners themselves, Chairman and Mr. Wilson, there's so much more that you will put light on and insights that we may not have even observed. And as we proceed, we know we live in the real world where we require common decency and know full well that this world was never intended to be 100% safe. But we must do all we can to make it safe for all of us and not allow ourselves to be ruled by fear, but be ruled by love and by courage. That is the price of love. Courage is the price of love. Because if you don't love, there's no need for courage. If you don't care, there's no need for courage. But if you love and you care, then courage is overcoming fear. And the fear of the unknown is what all of humanity has progressed itself on, overcoming that fear. By the very essence of this modern time, if we are to return to our position, if we are to stay in a position where we believe that we shall not endeavor into the unknown, then Columbus would have remained in Spain. Whether he should have or should not have. Mr. Peterson would not be my friend today, standing and sitting with each other in Trinidad and Tobago. NASA would not have endeavored men to the moon. But it's not just these grand things. It's about crossing the road. The gall of Mr. Holder to suggest that he only goes where there are road crossings and lights. I don't know which part of Trinidad he lives. Or there are places that have them, but I will not travel to Port of Spain to use a crossover when I live in Charleville. I'm just giving you an example. So we have to take a real world approach to all that we do. And as I never imagined to be this long, but I'm still within the hour or thereabouts, let me just say, before I take my seat, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Wilson, your incisive questions, your insights into the very technical areas, I want to assure you, has not gone unnoticed in this country. To my beloved senior, thank you very much. The cross-examination that we continue to learn from, like a surgeon's knife, not being a surgeon, without being carried away by the inanity that some of the responses you got, clinically dissecting the lies and the frauds that were put before you and passed as sworn truths. Thank you. to my noble friend, Mr. Peterson, who does his job as a true warrior, standing where he belongs, on the side of his client. Whether he holds personal views is irrelevant. This is the nobility of our practice. I say congratulations and thank you, my brother. To my friends who represent LMCS, admirable efforts on your side. Mr. Kangaloo and his team, a name that resonates in the legacy of Trinidad and Tobago, had the good fortune of knowing his father, bastion of the old values, and a man who stood for discipline. And the name resonates in our Court of Appeal. Justice Wendell Kangaloo, one of the foremost, brightest contributions that one could have made to our judicial stock.
This is all very interesting.
I'm about to close. Once again, a junior of Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maraj. The young Chase Pegas, who I have grown to be very fond of, who I have told that he has a long way to go in terms of his courtroom presence. Young Sebastian, the best outcome of both Mr. and Mrs. Peterson that one could have hoped for. Yes. And the other best is, of course, his daughter, who I have not had the privilege of being here with us.
She's a lawyer too, is she not?
Oh, yes, but I have not had the privilege of being in the same space with her. So,
do you think that might be deliberate?
Yes. Yes. I knowing my friend, it's more than deliberate. It's spiteful. Yes. And, of course, Ms. Alfonso, who has been a friend for almost 30 or more years, and I will proud to say was the provider of my paper, diligent as usual. And a young Mr. Hussein Shah, who has, I think, impressed all of us with the quickness and responsiveness of his assistance to the Commission on Legal Issues. So, before I take my seat, your secretary, Ms. Sinanan, I have been in government, so if you did not first know, I was a minister of government. I have acted as prime minister in this country on several occasions. And notwithstanding the word in the wider community about public servants, I could tell you my experience has been that there are persons who carry the burden of the state on their shoulders without any acclamation and acknowledgement. And Ms. Sinanan has been one of those. And I want to say your work is deeply, we are very deeply grateful for it. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Commissioner Wilson, to all, God bless, and I thank you for having been given the opportunity to be here and to be in your presence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramadan. We're going to take a short break in a moment. Ms. Alfonso, I understand that you are, I hope I don't say indelicately, uncomfortable with a particular injury or ailing under one. Are you all right to proceed today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I may take the opportunity to stand, although traditionally, I'm not actually sure which one will work, but whichever one works, I'll endeavor to use that one.
Can I say, first of all, I would appreciate it if you came forwards to the place where Mr. Ramadar is, and perhaps with his consent, he'll allow you to use the lectern that he has, which might assist you to stand upright, as it were, rather than having to stoop over. Because if it's a back injury, as I understand it might be, it would be helpful to do that. And whilst you're making your submissions, if you feel the need to sit down, just do. Don't worry about it. Just sit down and then stand up again if you feel. Whatever is comfortable for you, just find the appropriate way to address us from where Mr. Ramadar is at the moment. And don't be embarrassed about standing up or sitting down during the course of your address. Just do whatever makes you feel comfortable.
I'm grateful, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so we'll take a 15-minute break now. So we'll resume at 25 to 1. Do you think you'll be finished within the hour as designated?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Chairman, I will be.
Good. Well, I have something to attend to at 2:05, which will only take 10 minutes or so, but I need to make sure that I'm there to do that. So that will naturally fall into the hour lunch that we take after you. All right, thank you very much. So,
thank you.
15 minutes, please, 25 minutes to 1 o'clock.